All right, everyone, it is so good to be with all of you this morning. I do bring greetings to you from Bishop LaBelle, who is at the House of Bishops this week and comes back to the Pacific Northwest late on Tuesday. So know that he is praying for all of us, and especially for us as we spend some time together today as Bishop's staff and also Epiphany. So Diane sent a handful of questions to me, things for me to consider talking about. And so I want to give a brief introduction and then talk a little bit about work that is happening in the office of the bishop and in the diocese at large. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. I want to save a considerable amount of time for questions for all of you. And so know that we will hopefully have 15 or 20 minutes or so for questions. All right, so what is a canon to the ordinary? This is a question that I get often when I am making visitations around the diocese. It is such a phenomenal Anglican title for someone who is working within the Episcopal Church. So canon to the ordinary. So canon means someone who is either appointed by a bishop or by a cathedral dean to serve in some kind of particular ministry on behalf of either the diocese or the cathedral. And in this case, ordinary refers to the bishop. And so I am the bishop's canon, and the bishop has a number of canons who are on staff at Diocesan House. And there is one particular canon, most dioceses have this, a canon to the ordinary, who is essentially kind of an assistant to the bishop. Sometimes I joke, and sometimes I don't joke, that the job description of a canon to the ordinary is all duties as assigned by the bishop. My role at this point in our diocesan life is that I serve as the chief advisor, chief of staff of Diocesan House, and sort of chief operating officer. So those of you who have been in some kind of military context, or for those who have been out on the sea, as EXO for the diocese. I, in addition to all of those things, have primary responsibility for congregational transitions. So I am the lead transition officer for the diocese, which is also fairly common for canons to the ordinary. So I spend a lot of my time working with congregations that are discerning, and clergy who are discerning transitions, and then for congregations that are in fact in some form of pastoral transition, meaning that they are discerning new clergy, or in some cases discerning new models of ministry. And you all will know that we have, we have congregations that are as large as Epiphany and the cathedral, all of the way down to congregations that worship anywhere from 6 to 10 people. And so just a huge breadth of people and a huge breadth of congregations. And some of our congregations are discerning how to actually have effective and faithful ministry, especially in different kinds of contexts and smaller contexts where their numbers are declining and they recognize it as time for a change. And so I do some of that work as well with those congregations. Kate shared, so I've been in the diocese as a layperson and as a clergy person for about 25 years. And I have been a priest for 8 years and have had a number of calls in that short season of ministry, including serving at the cathedral as curate and as a canon, at the Mission to Seafarers for 2 amazing years of ministry as the pandemic was well underway, so really doing a lot of pastoral work with seafarers, international seafarers who make our lives possible in this country, honestly, and then also working with port folks. And then my last call before being called by the bishop into this role was as the rector of St. David's in Friday Harbor on San Juan Island. And so I have been in this role for all of 10 months, and so very, very grateful for this new ministry and also learning a lot in this short period of time. All right, so a little about the canon to the ordinary. So I want to talk briefly about the diocese, just generally, and then we can talk a little bit about how the bishop's office supports work that is happening in the diocese. So the Diocese of Olympia, mountains all the way out to the ocean, Vancouver to Vancouver, almost essentially. So essentially all of Western Washington is the Diocese of Olympia. We are made up of roughly 100 congregations. It's actually closer to about 95, but we can round it up to 100 congregations. We are the second largest diocese in Province 8, so essentially all of the west coast of the United States. One of the things that has surprised me a little bit now that I am working in the office of the bishop is that we actually are a fairly large diocese. We're not one of the super large dioceses like Virginia and Texas and New York, but we are a large diocese. And in some ways we function very much like a large diocese, and in some ways we function very much like a small diocese, and so we get stretched and pulled in all kinds of interesting ways. The diocese, those 100 congregations are spread all over the diocese, from Cathlamet all of the way up to Blaine, to Snoqualmie, and then all of the way out to, I guess probably our furthest congregation out is Forks. And then, as I discovered, 3 congregations in San Juan County, so remote congregations and urban contexts as well. Clergy. There are a lot of clergy in this diocese, and Kate, I'm not sure when you were in Connecticut how many clergy there were in Connecticut. We have canonically resident in this diocese, so clergy who call this and consider this diocese their home diocese. About 350 clergy, so deacons and priests. And then a number of people who are licensed who can come into this diocese who do ministry. I don't know if that... Okay, so yeah, okay, so probably many more clergy. So lots and lots of clergy in this diocese. And then regions. So we divide our congregations up by region, mostly by geographic region. Historically, a long time ago, maybe when I first started, and Kate may remember this too, certain regions are more active than other regions in terms of how they get together with one another. So my last region that I was a part of was the Mount Baker region, and so all of the congregations in the far northern part of the diocese, clergy get together roughly once a month and gather with each other. Clergy on the peninsula get together a whole lot and work with each other and do some shared work as congregations. And then in Seattle, Holy See, which is where Epiphany and the Cathedral and Ascension and I think St. John in West Seattle are. I don't know how often you guys get together, I think periodically as clergy to talk. Oh no, okay, interesting.
I was going to say 20 years ago when I was new in the diocese, that group was pretty active, meeting monthly, because my very first experience of Epiphany was riding my bike from West Seattle because we didn't have 2 cars. And
Oh yeah. So this is initiatives that we keep hearing reflected back from many people throughout the diocese, and including many of our clergy colleagues, is that there's this deep desire to discern or kind of rediscern how regionally we gather as clergy and as congregations. You guys talked about it. Doit talked about it in his sermon, relationships matter. And I heard from several of you too, right before this, that there's this deep desire to start building relationships across congregations. And one of the ways that we do that is by having more effective and active regional ministries. And so this is one of the things that we will be leaning into a little bit more in the next couple of years. All right, so there's a little bit about that. So I want to talk briefly too about, I want to talk a little bit about how the diocese functions, and then also how the Office of the Bishop supports congregations in that work. So the Episcopal Church and congregations to a certain extent as well model this, where we have a shared governance, shared ministry, mutual ministry. Those who have worked with me on council and on budget and finance in the last several years probably get tired of hearing me talk about mutual ministry, but I talk about mutual ministry all of the time. It is this shared work that we do, and it is also theologically appropriate, I think, since God asks us to co-partner and co-create with God. And the same is true, I think, as it relates to the way that we govern and live and move and have our being as church. So in the Diocese of Olympia, we have the bishop, a new bishop who was consecrated a year ago today, ordained and consecrated a year ago today, who works as the ecclesiastical head of our diocese. And there are governing bodies in the diocese. We have 3 governing bodies that work with him. Many of the people on those governing bodies are elected from around the diocese. It's one of the things that we do through convention. And the governing bodies share in that leadership with the bishop. And we also all gather together as convention once a year. And diocesan convention also sets direction for how we discern and how we live into our vision and our mission. So 3 distinct bodies of people who come together to do this work. Somewhat similar to what happens in a congregational setting. So in a congregation, you have a clergy, you have a rector and associates, or in this case, a rector and then a canon vicar. And then you have a vestry. And together, those 2 groups of people work to discern and to actualize what the mission is of a congregation at any given time. And so we do that also on a diocesan level as well. And so governing bodies in this particular season of ministry, one of my jobs also is to accompany governing bodies in their work in interacting with the bishop and also with the diocese at large. And so we, as governing bodies, are deeply, deeply engaged at this point in discernment around what our mission is and how we live into our mission in this moment, and how we can effectively do that, and also listen and gather feedback from the diocese at large so that that can then be incorporated. There are, at Epiphany, you have 2 members of governing bodies at this point. Clyde, are you here? There's Clyde, yes. So Clyde and Dwight both serve on the board of directors. That is one of our 3 governing bodies. And then diocesan council, and then the standing committee are the other 2 governing bodies. So I want to say a little bit about that. All right, what does the office of the bishop do? That's a good question. So I would say that we have a couple of different key roles. One is to support the bishop as the bishop is discerning and inviting all of us into deeper, more faithful ministry, more faithful discipleship, I think is how Bishop Phil would say that. So we do a lot of work making sure that the bishop has the support that he needs in order to actualize the mission of this diocese. And then we all also support the work that you are doing. And we do that in a number of different ways, and I'll talk about that as we get toward the end of my particular part of the presentation. But there are a number of things that we try to make sure are in place so that infrastructure, and I'm going to say, I call it infrastructure, that there's good infrastructure in place so that congregations are set free to be able to do the work that you guys need to do to live the gospel in your current context. I come with a strong administrative background and finance background, and in my prior work at the University of Washington, Scott Davies and I worked quite closely together in that role. Our role there very much was to make sure academic departments could do the work that they needed to do, and I very much take this approach to my job as canon to the ordinary. I want to make sure that congregations have the resources you need to then be able to do the work that you are called to do in this moment. And so, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those administrative pieces, both the things that are working and also things that we're realizing we need to do more of. So diocesan staff, support the bishop, support all of you, and then we also support the governing bodies as well, doing their work. All right, so there's that. So mission and vision and goals. I want to talk briefly about that too. And then also about priorities in the office of the bishop in these early days of an episcopate. So, okay, I'm going to ask a question. how many of you have, so Diocesan Convention is coming up, and we're now finally starting to drop pieces of information, critical pieces of information that people need for Diocesan Convention. Has anyone read the narrative budget that has just been published about a week ago? Okay, awesome. That I figured was going to be the answer. I commend that document to you because that will give you a lot more information, very granular information about ministries that are happening at this point as we discern and support the diocesan mission. And at a very high level, this is what the bishop and the governing bodies at this point are discerning our focus in ministry is, our mission at this point as the Diocese of Olympia. So at the heart of it is discipleship. The bishop in one of his videos earlier this summer said that we are all apprentices of Jesus. And I like actually thinking about us as apprentices of Jesus. It's a different way of framing discipleship. And so at the heart of what we do in this diocese, and I think what has called the bishop into this diocese in this moment is that we very much recognize and long for and yearn for being faithful disciples of Jesus. And so we will spend a lot of time in this early season of Phil's episcopate figuring out what that means both at a diocesan level and then also congregationally, and figuring out how we support each other in that work. And then out of that work then flows a focus on beloved community, creation justice, and then congregational health and vitality. Now, those three things, those are not new things. We've been talking about those in this diocese for a very long time. One of the things that I will say that strikes me as I listen to the bishop and the governing bodies talk about these kind of four major focuses of the mission is that for the last many years we've been budgeting and determining and discerning our operating budget as a diocese based on core priorities. And at the top of those core priorities for the last 4 years have been multicultural ministry, so somewhat becoming beloved community, congregational development, creation care, and creation justice and faith formation. And so as the bishop has been discerning with the governing bodies, one of the things that he is realizing, and I think we are all realizing, is that the bishop is coming in on a conversation and work that has been going on in this diocese for a long period of time. And rather than scratching all of that and starting from scratch, he is recognizing that we have already been doing really good work here and wants to figure out how to take it to the next level, again, so that we can be faithful to this work that we have been called to do for many years. And so I want to say that. It's one of the things that we reflect on and name with each other in the office of the bishop, and also particularly with diocesan council, is that the bishop is coming in on a conversation and work that has already happened and has already been going on. And he wants to continue that work and continue supporting us in that work. So I say that. The other part of our mission statement at this point is this recognition that stewardship in all of its different forms is critically important. It is the infrastructure that helps us be able to live more fully and faithfully into this work that God is giving us to do. I will say, as a person who has worked in administration essentially my entire working career, my heart sings a little bit when we finally start acknowledging that the work that we all do together is critically important. And so that includes the work of the governing bodies. It includes the work that Diocesan House is doing. It includes the work that your staff here is doing to help really empower all of you to do really good ministry. And it also says that the resources of this diocese, we know this, but we need to specifically state it, the resources of this diocese, our financial resources, our property resources, our people resources are all critical to making the ministry of the diocese and also of congregations do the work and be the people that God is calling us to be. And so we're also recognizing that we have work to do, especially in the office of the bishop, around how we develop and how we determine what those infrastructure pieces are, both for us internally, but then also as we support all of you. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So there's that. Let's talk a little bit about priorities in the office of the bishop. I can, yes. Thank you for, yeah, I know. Oh, okay. Tell me if this is better. Okay, there. Well, see, I can hear myself a little bit better. Okay, priorities in the office of the bishop. Okay, and if you cannot hear, just go like this. Tell me that. So, all right. So priorities in the office of the bishop. So this last year, one of the things, there are 4 things we've been working on, and that the bishop has really helped the staff kind of focus our time. We recognize there's a lot to do. Kate and I were talking, there's a lot to do in congregations, and we also know we can't do it all. And so one of the things that the bishop has worked with senior staff on this in January is to help set some high-level priorities for us. So those 4 priorities have been visitations. So the fact that I am here visiting with you all is one of the priorities. So when the bishop came, it is canonically required of him to visit every single congregation in a diocese once every 3 years. So he needs to visit every congregation at least once every 3 years. And because of the pandemic and other things, there are many congregations in this diocese that have not had visits by a bishop in a very long time. My congregation that I came from had not had a visit from a bishop since 2014. San Juan Island, you can get there. Really, you can get there. And so one of the things that I think has been reflected back to the bishop is this deep desire to start forming and reforming relationships with congregations throughout the entire diocese. And so one of the things that Phil and I talked about was, okay, let's actually go visit every single congregation every year. The bishop cannot do that because he cannot he cannot visit 3 congregations every single Sunday, nor is it canonically required. However, those of us who are canons in the office of the bishop can help him do that. And so one of the things that we are doing, and we will commit to do for at least the next, 2 or 3 years, or maybe as long as Phil is our bishop, is that every congregation will get a visit every single year. And so that means that those of us who are staff canons will visit roughly 25 congregations a year, in addition to other visits that we are making. And I have to say, I am just absolutely delighted. It has been such a joy to be able to go visit congregations throughout this diocese. I was at St. Matthew's and Castle Rock for Palm Sunday, which was quite an amazing thing, and then at Anacortes Christ Church for Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, and then at St. Mark's Cathedral for Easter. Very, very interesting experience to be able to see that breadth of ministry. And so we are doing a lot of work to figure out how we can effectively go out and visit and then also deeply listen to what is happening within congregations. So that's the first thing. The bishop is also releasing, so the second priority is what we're calling Zimzum. How many of you guys have heard, he's talked about Zimzum in other settings, but how many of you have seen the videos that he is starting to release? Yeah, okay, there's at least one person. And so he's going to release a series of videos for the next 3 years, really about spiritual practices and spiritual disciplines. It's there to help encourage people to lean into those. And in some congregations, they are picking that up and using it as a particular formation offering in their congregations. And others are just plugging in as they have time, and others are just using it as material that then supports other stuff. So it is one of Phil's ways of being able to teach with us and to us about what are these practices that help us be effective disciples and apprentices of Jesus. So that's that. Another part that we are working on at this point is convention. One of the things that I heard as I started in the office of the bishop is that when convention season rolls around, nobody from the office of the bishop calls folks back. Kate has worked in the office of the bishop, so she knows this. Convention takes a lot of work for us to put on, and we also recognize we can do it better, and we need to be more available to the diocese for those 6 weeks leading up to convention. And so we're doing some work right now in terms of process improvement and trying to be creative about how we come together and support diocesan convention. And then the last thing is, for this current year, is around pastoral transition, so those congregations that are in transition. I have worked in the first 10 months here with about 20 different congregations that have some form of transition. That could mean calling a curate, calling an associate, calling a priest in charge, calling a rector or a vicar. That's a lot of congregations in a short period of time. And it has been really, really good to get engagement with those congregations and to start to see patterns about what is happening and also ways that we can really support those congregations. And so we've been being very intentional about our work with transitions. I will also say, and Ivor Hillisland, who is our canon for congregational development, I think would second this, is that the number one act of congregational development that a congregation does is calling their clergy, calling their rector. And so we want to make sure that we are supporting congregations to do really good discernment and to make really, really good calls of people who are clergy coming to be in ministry with you. You know this. You've done this. You have 2 amazing clergy in this place, and so you are doing and attending to that work of discernment and transitions really well. And we want to encourage many congregations throughout this diocese to be able to do that same kind of work. So those are the 4 things we've been focusing on this year. And it's almost a new year, and so what we anticipate being some of the focuses this upcoming year are going to be around things like discipleship. So what does it mean? And how do we as the Office of the Bishop support congregations? And how are you doing things that can then be shared across the diocese at large? Relata is an example, and I'm looking at the sign up there. So what are the ministries that are happening right now that we really want to raise up and to support? Communications is one of the focuses that we need to spend some time on. We have a lot of things that we send out from the Office of the Bishop. And I'm going to, again, look at Kate. Our clergy newsletter comes out every week. And I think most of us just kind of like skim through it because it's the same stuff every single week. And so we need to do a lot of work to really refresh some of those pieces of communication and the ways that we're communicating with congregations. And to also learn where it's happening in a really good, new, creative kind of way out in the diocese, so that we are able to share stories with each other, rather than, I call it across the diocese at this point a little bit like a set of classified ads. And so it is what it is, and we have some work to do there, and we want to lean into that. Sacred Waters is another thing that we will start spending time on. St. Andrew's House and Harmony Hill have merged into a single entity. This, actually, the Board of Directors and Council voted to make that happen in the summer of this year. And so really doing some work to help support that new entity as it gets off the ground in Hood Canal. And then there is work to be done, some of the administrative work that I was referring to, and that includes doing some strategic financial visioning. We are a diocese that does not necessarily do long-term financial planning. We have lots of resources, and we are grateful for that. And we need to do some more work in terms of doing projections and saying, okay, what does it look like next year and 3 years from now and 5 years from now, so that we can actually do some longer-term planning and figure out how we can support and resource the mission work that is happening here. And then some other administrative pieces that we need to lay some groundwork for. One of the things that I heard during the walkabouts, and I will say as a rector of a tiny congregation, a small but mighty congregation, is that I wished there had been things that the diocese would have helped provide to us in terms of accounting and payroll and resources to attorneys and that kind of stuff that I spent a lot of time doing that I would love to have had partners on. And so we are going to start spending some time on that too. And I know that that was something that did come up in walkabouts as well. And it is, we have work to do, and we've got a good group of people in place, I think, to start doing that work. So those are some of the things that are going to be the focus. So the last thing that I want to talk about, actually, how much time do we have?
15-ish minutes to go.
Okay. So the last thing that I want to talk about, and then Q&A. So how does the diocese support Epiphany, and how does Epiphany support the diocese? This was the other question that Diane wanted me to explore. So one of the things that I think that the diocese does for every congregation, sometimes well, sometimes could be better, is really helping to provide the infrastructure for what it means for us to be a diocese. So in the Episcopal Church, the smallest unit, I've heard several people talk about this, the bishop does as well, the smallest unit of the Episcopal Church is the diocese. And so the diocese really is the container around which we all in this diocese minister in our particular contexts. And so, a part of this larger unit that is the Episcopal Church in Western Washington, followers of Jesus in Western Washington. And so we support you in that in a number of ways, and in the office of the bishop, especially with infrastructure kinds of things. And the governing bodies also set this broader vision and mission, which then congregations are feeding up to and doing some co-ministry around. So that's what I'll say about that. And then how does Epiphany support the diocese? Well, the accountant canon to the ordinary who you have is going to say the first way that you do, one of the ways, a critical way that you do that is through assessment. So every congregation in this diocese pays assessment. It is not a tax, I will say that. Research faculty used to talk to me about overhead rates as a tax. It is not a tax. It is a shared commitment that helps us all live together as Christians and Episcopalians in this diocese, and so it pays for a number of different things. So that is one of the things that you do. Epiphany to the diocese, another thing that you do too, and that every congregation does on behalf of each other, is praying for one another. So we saw in the prayers of the people this morning, I think it was in the prayers of the people and it is in the leaflet, we have a diocesan cycle of prayer. Every week we are praying for some set of ministries and some set of congregations. So we pray for each other. You guys pray for St. Mark's, and you pray for Orcus Emmanuel or for St. James Cathlamet. They pray for you as well. And so that is one of the things that we do and that you do on behalf of the diocese. And then, and we talked briefly about this too, missionally, Epiphany has, you guys participate in convention, you participate in a number of governing bodies, again, Clyde being on the board of directors, we've got a number of commissions. Kate does just amazing things, not just in the diocese, but at large in the Episcopal Church. So you guys have a lot of different ways that you are participating in and really helping to set direction for what is happening within the diocese and also at the Episcopal Church at large. So there's that. All right, and now I'm going to be quiet because I have used most of my time and I really want to hear questions from all of you. So Kate's going to run around with a microphone. Thank you for, yeah.
So it's okay. We'll have. You can.
I'm curious as to whether the diocese offers support for a parish in conflict.
Okay, so the question, does the diocese offer support for congregations that are in conflict? Yes, yes we do. And we work, I mean, it depends on the nature of the conflict in terms of how we are supporting and who we are working with, but yes, we do. And I will say that there is at least one congregation that the bishop and Ivar Hillesland and I are working very, very closely with at this point that is navigating conflict. And I think it's critical work that we need to do. So, yeah. And it gets to this friction. Deutsch's sermon was so spot on, friction. Like friction, I think a lot of times we don't like friction, and yet it is out of that bumping into each other that we, I think, are able to finally start to go more deeply into what is at the heart of an issue and what is at the heart of what's going on within a congregation. And so this is critical work for us. So, yeah, and I'm happy to visit later if you'd like to. So. Oh,
You give some examples of conflict?
yeah, I mean, I would say all kinds of things. I mean, it could be as simple as, and simple is not really the right word to apply to any of these situations, but it could be something like making a change to a liturgy. And so a change to a liturgy, there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on underneath of that in terms of how, like, what's the approach to discerning that it's time to make the change? What is the change? Who's been involved? How long are you going to explore this? So those are, I think, kind of initial questions, but underneath that are a whole lot of other things that we try to work with congregations and people who are involved in conflict to say, okay, what's really going on here? What's going on underneath the waterline? So that seems like a simple thing. I think big conflicts that we are working on are when people within a congregation are not completely all on the same page and don't know how to talk to each other about what the mission of a particular congregation is or how to carry out that ministry, especially if people are approaching it from a perspective of scarcity and it's hard to let go of what has been to trust that something new is going to come, but something that is going to look very different than what a congregation has historically experienced. That's a significant conflict, and there are congregations that are navigating that right now. And then I think there's always a question about resources and how decisions are being made, and if there's not a lot of transparency around how decisions are being made around budgeting or how that connects and aligns to mission, I think that can also be a cause of pinching. So.
How are assessments made? Are they based on pledging units, or are they based on total attendance of a church in a year?
That is an excellent question. So assessments are based off of this thing called net disposable income. So essentially it is what a congregation brings in terms of pledges and other operating income. And then out of that, we end up subtracting money that congregations spend for outreach and long-term facilities improvements. But the rule of thumb generally is that it is what operating income is, less just a handful of other exceptions. And it's a revenue-based calculation.
To that from my work in the broader Episcopal Church. I've done a lot of work with our parochial reports, and there's something unique about this diocese and just a couple others that I think is really great, and this is something Bishop Rickle brought to this diocese, that in most dioceses, the assessment is calculated on a 2 to 3 year lag from the parochial report data. So if that data is turned in, say, in March for 2025, the assessment would be based on 2023 numbers. So with churches growing rapidly or shrinking rapidly, you can see there's a problem, right? Because the income's fluctuating. Many years ago, this was one of Bishop Rickle's, I think, the best things, one of the many great things he did, is our assessment is calculated in real time, which is very unique. So it's calculated, is it the month prior or 2 months prior, but it's very close. I will say, and when the change happened, Epiphany was growing rapidly, and it was a big jump for us because we had to do a giant jump because we had increased so much. But once we hit that, it is so much better to be in real time. And I did a lot of work of interviewing and working with canons for finances across our Episcopal Church in 20 countries, and it's very unique to do that. So I'm really proud of that. Not many people know that, but it's a really great thing that we do. Yep.
Because it is hugely helpful so that we can actually have, we can anticipate in real time too what is happening for the upcoming year in terms of what assessment revenue is coming, or assessment dollars. So, and Kate is right, there are very few dioceses that have done this, and I think it is a really, really good thing for us as a diocese.
You talked about active regional ministries, and I don't really know what that means. What does that look like?
Now it is. Holy See got together, I think, a couple of times a year, congregations that wanted to get together. And one of those things included diocesan convention delegates getting together to talk about what's going on in the budget. And can somebody explain to us from Diocesan House what this $6 million budget is about? And so we would get together and talk about that in convention resolutions and that kind of stuff. And then we'd vanish, and then we'd come back a year later and have this conversation again. And it was an incredibly lifeless conversation. It was not particularly generative for anybody. And so I'm not sure that we know what it looks like. I think this is one of the things that we are trying to discern with each other about what it could be. And again, I think for people who have come from other dioceses or who've had experiences in other dioceses, they will have examples about what good, healthy, effective regional ministry could look like. Ideas that I have, and again, this is mostly from my time in Mount Baker, so up, the northern part of the diocese, is having congregations come together to say, what are shared resource needs that we could talk about? So, like, why does St. David's, Orcas Emmanuel, and Grace Lopez, why do they have 3 administrators? Why are they not having conversations about how can we actually have one person who does all of this for all 3 of these congregations, and for our Lutheran siblings on the islands too? How can we do some shared faith formation opportunities? How can we actually get together just to meet each other and figure out what does it mean to be the Episcopal Church in the northwestern part of the diocese? And then as clergy, what does it mean for us to also be able to support each other, knowing that regionally there's a little bit more consistency across the context that maybe we can share with each other. So it could be things like that. It could be a bunch of other stuff. I don't know, but that's a really critical. It's a simple question, but it's a critical one. So, yeah.
And that brings us to time. I want to say thank you to Cristi for being here with us. So thank you so much for answering questions. Maybe if you have a few minutes, you can be here if you have another question.